Shalom, this is Levi Shore. Welcome back to Sweet Good Torah. We're going to do Parsha Yisro. We're going to do something incredible today. We're going to learn about the Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai, and we're going to analyze the great miracles that happen with the giving of the Torah. And we're going to first look through the lens of some Midrashim, some Midrash, and then we're going to look through the lens of science. And I think if you stick around, you're going to find it really interesting. All right, so when was the Torah actually given? It was given on the sixth day of the month of Sivan. So it was a nice, warm, summer day when it was given. It was Shabbos, it was Shabbat. And the Kadosh Baruch Hu, this is according to I believe, which midrash is this? I believe this is Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer. It says that Hakadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy One, blessed be He revealed Himself to Yisrael, to the Jewish people on Har Sinai, on Mount Sinai, and it says it's from His place, which is an interesting concept. And it says that Har Sinai, it was nitlash, it was like torn away, it was ripped away, and then the Shemayim, the heavens were opened up, and they were niftechu, and then they entered into Rosh Hashanah. So it's saying that Hashem actually took the heavens and He brought them down onto Mount Sinai, which is pretty miraculous. And then it entered into the top of the mountain, and then it was covered. The whole mountain was covered in Arafel. It was covered in this really deep darkness. I mean, if we go into the scientific terms, the dark fire is the dark energy, and darkness is the dark matter, and it covers the mountain. And then the Kadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem, was sitting upon His throne. So it's a question: what does it mean an infinite being is sitting upon the throne? But the Kisei Kavod is in the heavenly world of Berea, the world of creation. And it's made of sapphire. It's the famous vision that was given in the Nevuah of Yechezkel, of Ezekiel. And he saw this magnificent, like, sapphire throne, and the bricks. I don't know what the throne's made of, but there was those sapphire bricks are the floor, and there's the Ophanim. There's these great circular malachim, some kind of circular angels. They may look like suns or stars, and they're kind of like the four, like wheels of the Merkava of the throne. Just wondrous stuff. I'm not going to go so much into Yechezkel's vision right now, but it would make an incredible video in the future. So this infinite being sitting on His throne, and then His feet are standing on the darkness, on the Arafel. Very mystical, deep meaning of this midrash of Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer. So then we see another midrash from Pirkei de Rebbe Eliezer, and he says that how Hashem woke us up. It was like this stormy summer night. It was a very short summer night, and Hashem woke us up with thunder, and I believe the Torah uses the word kolos, meaning voices, kind of like a parent waking up their child to go to carpool. I'm sure everyone's maybe experienced this, or B'ezrat Hashem, you will experience. Sometimes, you're gently trying to get everyone up, and sometimes you just like, you get fed up. It's like, okay, it's time to get up. It's time for carpool. Enough's enough. And then the barakim, the lightning, and this is on a very short summer night, as we said. And then Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses called out also to help wake everybody up. And Moses said, the chasen, the groom, Hashem, is waiting for the kala, is waiting for the bride. And this is like to come to the chuppah for the marriage. And this is the poetic language we see Shlomo HaMelech, King Solomon, use in Shir HaShirim, the Song of Songs, that Hashem is the husband, and we as a nation, the Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, are the bride. And it's the whole relationship, discussed in the beautiful Song of Songs. So then Shemos Rabbah says, and the Jewish people, they got up and they assembled themselves at the foot of Har Sinai, of Mount Sinai, and the men were on one side, the women were on the other side, and they were joined. This is really fascinating midrash. They were joined by all the millions of unborn neshamos, all the souls of the Jewish people that would eventually be born. So we were all there. And all the neshamos, all the souls of the Gerim, all the souls of the converts that throughout the thousands of years of Jewish history would come to also accept the Torah, and everyone's soul was there at Mount Sinai, hearing Hashem speak to us. So the Yalkut Shimoni, he says that Hashem descended upon Har Sinai in a burst of fire, and He was surrounded by a host of 22,000 malachim. And it's very interesting. I'm not going to go into it so much, but the malachim were in four directions, and north, south, east, and west. And each host of the malachim, they had a degel. They had this like some kind of spiritual banner. And then I think each degel from each direction is divided into another three groups. And then that's how we got the galim. We got the special flags or the banners for each tribe. And I believe when the rest of the nation saw us, this was how the whole idea of like national flags begun. Fun with flags from Big Bang Theory. But it was first we saw the Malachim, we saw the angels with the flags, and they were the heavenly armies, and then we arranged ourselves exactly like that with our flags, with our Degalim, and I think the other nations said we want flags too, and then everyone has flags. So then it was a great earthquake. The earth was shaking, and there was thunder, there was kolos, and there was lightning, barakim, and Bnei Israel, the Jewish people, heard the sound of the kol of the shofar. They heard the shofar, and it was chazak ma'od. It was very strong. And the Midrash says, the Yalkut Shimoni says, it's getting louder and louder and growing in intensity. And it was such a high decibel level, like we couldn't. It's almost to the edge of where the decibels are so high, it's painful. And then Hashem stops. And then the Mechilta says this was a thick cloud that covered the mountain. And Hashem bent the Shemayim, he bent the heavens until they reached the top of Har Sinai, until they reached the top of Mount Sinai. And then the Kisei HaKavod, Hashem's throne, descended upon the mountain like the king's ready, to greet his people. So this is very fascinating. So the Midrash Chazit, it says that Bnei Israel, they actually saw the sound waves. And this is what we're going to talk about. We're going to analyze this with science and see what's the anatomy of a miracle, in scientific terms. They actually saw the sound waves as they emerged from Hashem's mouth. Now, I think what this means is since Hashem is an infinite being, and Hashem fills not only the whole physical world, Hashem fills all the spiritual worlds above us, and then even what we call the known universe. The known universe is inside the middle of this infinite being, who the Mekublim, the Kabbalists call the Ein Sof, without end, the infinite. And so the universe, all time and space are just in the center of Hashem. That's why we call Hashem Hamakom, the place. It's the place for the universe. And they visualized fiery substance. They saw the sound waves, and the sound waves were coming in every direction. They were coming from the north. They were coming from the south. They were coming from the east. They were coming from the west. They were coming from the ground up. They were coming through all the Rikiim below, the levels of Gehenna. And they were coming from all the Rikiim above, the 7 Rikiim above, 7 heavenly spheres above, and the 7 spheres. And it's very deep mystical concept the Zohar talks about. There could be this hollow earth, and there's Rikiim inside the earth, this massive sphere of the earth. Very interesting stuff. And they saw all directions. They saw these sound waves, and they actually saw them, and they saw them as a fiery substance. And then when Hashem carved out the luchos, the 2 sapphire tablets, by the way, this always drives me crazy. They weren't curved. They weren't curved like they were portrayed. They were like rectangles of sapphire. Hashem carved the letters of the Asara Dibros, of the 10 Commandments, into these sapphire tablets, and they were miraculous. And like no matter what side you looked at them, the first thing, if they cut out, like like for instance, like the mem, and there's a little piece in the middle that floats, so it just miraculously flowed inside the lucos. And no matter what side you looked at it, it was always like looking at it from the front. And they saw this fiery substance of the sound waves actually carve out, engrave itself into the lucos. All right, so we're going to jump into the science a little bit. Let me see if I can bring up a share here. And we're going to talk a little bit about what's the difference between like sound and light. What's their scientific nature? Here, let me see if I can find how to do this with the share. So we'll share the screen here. I'm going to bring up this graphic first. Hopefully this works. We'll see. Okay, so what a sound wave is, all of energy is what science calls the electromagnetic waves. And just real quick, how it works is you have a magnetic wave connected to an electrical wave. So it's the electromagnetic. So you have electrical field and magnetic field, and that's what all of energy is made of. So a magnetic wave we usually call it in terms of polarity, like going from north to south. So I think this may be backwards. I'm not sure if the actual wave would go north to south, the magnetic wave, but we see what's going on here. So the magnetic waves go in one direction, and then the electrical waves are described in terms of the electrical force, so it's either positive or negative, and we see the polarity of the electricity there. And then what we're dealing with here is basically sound waves. So here it's going to be radio waves and the spectrum of visible light, and we're going to take a look at this. And just what I want you to see on this graphic here is just the size. So the size of the radio waves or sound waves is going to be the biggest. So it can be as tall as buildings, whereas the size of the actual wave of visible light is going to be very small. It's going to be like a bacteria. All right, so let me see if I can bring up this other graphic here, and hopefully that comes up. And let me see if I can get this one out of the way so I can see it. Okay, so here I think it's just an interesting graphic. So we're going to go through the science a little bit. So you see here that sound waves are at the bottom part of the electromagnetic spectrum, or the EMS, sorry. And then at the highest end is, the high radiation of the gamma rays. And then you'll see higher up is going to be the visible light. So we have visible light here. Okay, so let's go a little bit into the science. We'll try to keep it short because I know like sometimes my physics students will get too much into science and everyone goes into their own conversations, their eyes roll in the back of their heads. All right, but the bottom of the sound waves is going to be what's called the ELF, the extremely low frequency sound waves. And this is like the bottom. So their wavelength is going to be about 100 megameters. I'm not going to go into all of the, but it's very big. We said like, sound waves can be as big as buildings. And that's why you get this echo effect of sound waves. If you're in a big city, the sound waves will bounce off of the tall buildings, or if you're in a canyon, they'll bounce off of the canyon walls, and you'll get this echo. And so the wavelength is how big the actual waves are. So sound waves are the biggest. And then the frequency is how quickly do the waves come. So here they have a frequency of 3 hertz. And, they're the slowest of all. Sound waves are the slowest. And so this is the extremely low frequency end of sound waves. And then we have VHF, the very high frequency sound waves. So if this all sounds familiar, you may be familiar with VHF and UHF. And I think UHF goes into the first of the microwaves, but they used to broadcast, you're familiar with, if you're Gen X like me, you had your television set, you had a VHF or UHF, you had the switch. And the VHF is the highest frequency sound wave, so that's going to be a very high frequency sound wave. I think the UHF, if you're interested, is an ultra high frequency. I think it's the lowest level of microwaves. Okay, so but a VHF, so this is the sound waves that have the highest frequency. So their wavelength is going to be about 10 meters tall. So you'll see that there's a great discrepancy. So 1 megameter, we said before, they could be, the extremely low frequency could be 100 megameters, and 1 megameter, to show you how big it is equal to 1,000 kilometers. I don't want to go into miles right now, but it's big. They're very, very big. And then these are only 10 meters tall. I think a meter, I forgot exactly. I don't want to do the calculations, but I can't remember exactly. I think they're somewhere close to a yard maybe. But so the wavelength of the very high frequency sound is 10 meters, and the frequency is a lot faster. So now it's, I think it's 30 megahertz. Okay, so then to give you an idea of how fast sound travels, the speed of sound, this is at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be about average room temperature. It travels about 767 miles per hour. And to give you maybe a little more relatable idea, so it travels about 375 yards per second. So it's basically almost 4 football fields in about a second. So if you're standing in one end zone and someone's standing in an end zone about 4 football fields away, in a little over a second, you'll hear when someone starts talking. But if you're past that distance, that's when you can see something happen, but the sound doesn't reach you yet. Like you could hear someone maybe kick the ball, but the sound wave wouldn't reach you. If you were more than 4 football fields away, it'll take a little longer to get to you. All right, now visible light. So if you remember back from your science classes, so visible light spectrum is Roy G. Biv. So the lower frequency is going to be the red, then it goes into orange, yellow, and then the middle frequency is going to be the green frequency of light, and then Biv is blue, indigo, and violet. Okay, so then below this is the infrareds, and above this is the ultraviolets. Okay, so then to give you an idea here, the wavelength of visible light is going to be much smaller. And I think we said before, it's about the size of a bacteria. So it's a very small microscopic level we're dealing with now. And the wavelengths are only, I think, about 700 nanometers big. So much, much smaller than the sound waves. And the frequency is about 480 terahertz. So it's incredibly faster. And now the speed of light is much greater than the speed of sound. The speed of light's about 186,000 miles per second. So light can go around the Earth 7.5 times in 1 second, to give you the idea of speed. Okay, so what's the NACE? What's the miracle that we actually saw at Mount Sinai from a scientific perspective? What's fascinating is that we saw the sound waves, but we saw them at the frequency and wavelength of visible light because we could see. This is where we can actually see. So our power of vision only works in these frequencies of these wavelengths. But yet what Hashem did is he still kept it as sound. He kept them as sound waves, but he changed the frequency to the exact frequency, and wavelength of visible light. And that's what a nace is. A nace is when Hashem is changing the laws of physics or laws of nature, however you want to refer to them. So it's like, because if you would really change the frequency and the wavelength of a sound wave, it would become light. And then if you would slow it all down and make it bigger, it would become sound. But what a nace is, it's overriding the laws of physics. So Hashem keeps it as a sound wave, but yet gives it the measurements of the wavelength and frequency of visible light. And then I think it worked the other way too. And then I think we could actually hear light. So same thing in reverse. Hashem keeps it the visible light. He keeps the visible light as the same wavelength and frequency as light, but he changes it to the wavelength and frequency of sound, so then we can actually hear the light. I know, just incredible stuff. I mean, just Matan Torah is incredible to hear it like an infinite being speak. It's just really, really amazing stuff. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you back again soon on Sweet and Good Torah.